Well. Unit 2, Act 1, Scenes 4 and 5. We got to talk about this thing here. We got to talk about motivation. Take a moment, please. And I'm going to do a little magic. You write down this definition. Where'd that T come from? Anyway, so motivation. We will find out about motivation, discover more of motivation by looking at something we've been looking at, been talking about, and that's dialogue. Don't write it that big. You write it in just one little thing, but you would definitely want to put an exclamation point over there, exclamation point over there, exclamation point underneath or above it, depending on where you chose to put it on your lattice. Okay? Now, let's take a look at a few other things. So, when we talk about motivation, we're talking about what characters want, determining what they want. So, let's think about this in terms of ourselves first, okay? So, let's think about it in terms of career. What do you want to do when you grow up? Or what sort of thing do you want to do when you grow up? Do you want your parents' job? I did. My mom was a teacher. I'm a teacher. My dad made cabinets, and I would rather teach, right? Do you want what your parents have? Do you want more? Do you want less? Do you want the same? Something to think about. Okay. Now, if you don't know what kind of specific job you have, what sort of thing do you want? Power, control, money, creativity, all these things together. But I mean, which one kind of stands out the most? I mean, security, right? Being a civil servant or a teacher brings with much security to it. Being an expert, right? A doctor, lecturer, something like that. Social concern kind of is what drives me, right? Take a moment and think about that real quick. Take a moment and think. We'll pause it and do more magic. I'm gonna do more magic. That's what I was. There we go. Now, when we determine a character's motivation, we also determine basically about them. We learn about them. Okay. So these are the last meals of death row inmates. So this person here, Victor Fuhrer, oh, get out of here, you think? Can't get that thing. Oh, there it goes. All right. He wanted one single olive with the pit still in it for his last meal. What does it tell you about him? John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 people. This is what he wanted for his last meal. What does it tell you about him? And maybe you can't learn anything. This is Timothy McVeigh of the Oklahoma City bombing, killed 168 people. Right? Ricky Ray Vector. Uh, Look at this one. 7 counts of murder and escaping from prison. This is what he wanted for his last meal. What do we learn from these little details? Okay. So, if you could please turn in your book to page 103 and let's look at the very beginning and try and determine what's motivating Mr. Frank in 1945, where the play opens and goes back in time. So, um, Mr. Frank, you can't leave here. So, we know what Meep wants. She wants Mr. Frank to. Yeah, exactly. So, Mr. Frank, you can't leave. This is your home. Amsterdam's your home. Your business is here waiting for you. You're needed here. Now that the war's over, there are things that I can't stay in Amsterdam. So at first blush, we might think, oh yeah, what he wants is he wants to leave Amsterdam. But maybe it's deeper than that. Maybe it's a bigger conflict that covers more ground than that. Let's see what motivates him. It has too many memories for me. We probably already underlined this twice, but it's definitely worth putting a big old doop. Everywhere there's something. The house we lived in, the school, the street organ playing out there. I'm not the person you used to know, Meep. I'm a bitter old man. Forgive me, I shouldn't speak to you like this. But after all you did for us, the suffering, right? All of those ellipses contributing to and telling us something about what's motivating him. What does he want? He wants to forget, right? The main question of the story is how do we remember the past? Well, he is actively saying, I want to forget. But I bet the play has something different in mind. Check it out. Mr. Frank, did you see there's some of your papers here? Burn them, right? Instead of remember, he would rather forget them and burn them. But Mr. Frank, there are letters, notes. Burn them, all of them. He wants to forget. Burn this, and look how this is italicized. And then we start talking about going back in time to July of 1942. Take a moment. Reflect this on your lattice. Okay. So here we're on page 153. Take a moment to get there. You there? All right. Purpose of dialogue. Well, today we're focusing on motivation. So it shows what characters are like and what they want. Well, let's rather underline what they want. Oh, baby, I got it. Right? Motivation. We'll write there in little motivation. You don't have to write as big as me. All right. And the purpose of the dialogue is right? This word purpose, we want to remember, means function. What's the function of a flashlight? To light up a dark room. What's the function of dialogue? It's to tell us what the characters want, right? So the example that we just looked at was Mr. Frank. And what does Mr. Frank want? He wants to forget, right? And that's a huge conflict in this play, right? What's worth remembering? Why is it worth remembering? Why remember things, especially if they're painful? What's the point? Why don't you take a moment to your lattice? What's the point of remembering painful things? I'll take a sip while you write on your lattice. Oh, I agree. I agree. So, what could be the explanation there? He wants to forget. Well, the explanation is that the plot is going to talk about, or is going to point us at, what's worth remembering. Does this right off the thing? No, it doesn't. What's worth remembering? Remembering. Ooh, that don't look like a word. Sets the mood. Well, we're going to look at that right now or in a moment. Shows conflicts. Well, the main conflict is what should we remember? What should we forget? What moves the plot forward? Well, definitely this idea of what's worth remembering, what's worth forgetting. And sometimes even the ugly parts of this are worth remembering. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the uglier impulses that come up in the annex. All right. So let's take a moment. So here's some things that motivate Mr. Van Daan. These. Oh, I think I'll have one. Oh, wait, it says lung cancer on it. Mr. Van Daan, a couple years ago, to find out I shouldn't be smoking those anyway. All right. Cigarettes are pictured there. Now, Mr. Van Daan always wants to smoke. He always wants to eat, right? What does that tell us about his character? Is that an admirable trait? Right? So we really need to take a moment and think, okay, how about this one? Calling Anne Mrs. Quack Quack. What did Peter want in that moment? From his mother, from his possibly future wife or girlfriend, right? And what does he want? Right. So the Mrs. Quack Quack, we learned something about motivation there. Okay, let's look at one of the newer scenes before we start being actors and actresses. Let's look at one scene together here, real quick. This is when we first meet Mr. Dussel, a dentist who they end up rescuing. And let's find out what we can learn about motivations based on this here. And we'll also learn a little something about mood, and then we'll watch a scene together. Okay. To Mr. Dussel, welcome. This is on page 130. Page 130. Welcome, says Mrs. Frank. Mrs. Van Daan. That was good. This is after they drink the cognac. Wait till you're 21. Did Mr. Crawler warn that you won't get much to eat here? You can imagine. Oh boy. 3 ration books among the 7 of us. What's the function of these ellipses here? What's the function of this dialogue? Right? Peter walks away humiliated. Why is he humiliated? Why? So, Dussel, Mr. Van Daan, you don't realize what is happening outside that you should warn me of a thing like that. You don't realize what's going on. Oh, he's about to get some perspective. And Mr. Van Daan starts his characteristic pacing. Dussel turns to speak to the others. Right here in Amsterdam, every day, hundreds of Jews disappear. They surround a block and search house by house. Children come home from school to find their parents gone. Hundreds are being deported. People that you and I know. The Hollensteins, the Vessels. Oh, comma, no, period. No, exclamation point. They get their call-up notice. Come to the Jewish theater on such and such a day in an hour. Bring only what you can carry in a rucksack. Remember that from the beginning of the play. And if you refuse the call-up notice, then they come and drag you from your home and ship you off to Mauthausen, the death camp. We didn't know that things had got so much worse. Forgive me for speaking so, right? He still wants to make good with these others, but he's had a different experience. So what does he want? He wants safety. What did Mr. Van Daan want up there? He wanted to, let them know that we need food. Okay. Right. That, just because you're here. So you can see food versus safety. Let's think about it. Right. Comfort versus safety. Let's have our ideas in order here. Okay. Let's do a little bit of acting.